All right. This morning we're studying in Revelation chapter 12, 13, and 14. It's like Noam Pass one back there. It's like one pointed out that we can, when you study the book of Revelation, there's so many things that enter the picture from different people. We could watch a movie, we could watch something on television, a televangelist, or we could just read something. And it's sort of like the movie The Ten Commandments. When we watch it was a good movie, but Hollywood took its own embellishment of certain scenes, and that's what you remember. And then when you're trying to study it or in a class about the Ten Commandments, you think of the movie, which you shouldn't do. You should be thinking of the Bible, of what the Bible says. Revelation 12 begins the second half of the book of Revelation. And of course, this is different than from the other ways. But as we look at Revelation 1 through 11, the primary focus is on the various judgments and trials taking place on earth or the land. Revelation 12, 20 through 22 explains the heavenly background behind what took place in Revelation 1 through 11. Many images in this section correspond to Revelation 1 through 11. The angel of the abyss, the great dragon, chapter 12, 3 and 9, 144,000, chapter 7, 144,000, chapter 14, the seven trumps, 8th through the 11th chapters, seven bowls of wrath, 16, the great city, 11 through 8, the great city, Babylon, 14 and 8, the heavenly temple, 11, 19, and the heavenly city, 21 through 22 chapters. And I don't think we should lose sight of the purpose of the book, and that is to encourage, to remain faithful in the midst of persecution. We've got to remember John was seeing these things. And if we need to stress one thing, is that these things are figurative, not literal, and symbolic. In the chapter 12, verse 1 through 6, talks about the birth of a man-child. Verses 1 and 2, the great sign appeared in heaven, and John saw a woman clothed with the sun. Now, you know, when we read something like that, you say, well, it's no sense me reading it. I don't understand that. But the Bible can be understood if you take the time, if you look at it, look at the context, look at what's going on, who's talking, who's he talking to, what's he talking about. A symbol signifying glory. Look it over at Psalms 89, verse 36. One who dearly loved, Song of Solomon 6, 9, and 10. Upon her head she wore a garland of 12 stars. One may think of the vision of Joseph concerning the nation over in Genesis 37. The woman with the child. She cried out in labor and pain to give birth. Well, it's hard not to think of Mary. Take off one of those R's there, here. But there is deeper meaning. Look at, Norm, you read, if you will. This is one verse I'm going to read, and that is Genesis 3:15. Also, and we look over in 12, chapter of Revelation, in verse 3.
Genesis 3:15 says, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel."
All right. Think about that as we go through our study. Verses 3 and 4, another sign appeared in heaven, a great dragon. Later, this dragon is identified as Satan. Chapter 12, verse 9. He was fiery red. We think of it, even as when we were children, of the red individual with horns and a pitchfork, And we see here the color of bloodshed, a murderer from the beginning. John 8:44 would point out that. And we see the 7 horns indicates his intelligence and cunning. 2 Corinthians 2 and verse 11. He has 10 horns portraying his destructive power. Revelation 5 and 6, 13:1, 17:12. The 7 diadems. What's a diadem? Crown. All right. The 7 diadems on his heads representing authority. Does he have that authority from God? Well, certainly not. But he has authority over his followers. And we see with his tail, he drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Well, Satan is against people. He might want them, and he does, but really he's trying every way to get us, even members of the church, he's trying. And I've taught lessons on this, that even if every one of his tools fails, one of them, I say everyone, all but one, fails, he's got one that'll affect everybody. Remember what that's discouragement. We've all been discouraged at one time or another. And he uses that to discourage people of God. The dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. Since the decree of God in Genesis 3:15 that Noam read, Satan has tried many times to destroy the seed of woman. And the New Testament begins with Herod's attempt to kill Jesus in Matthew 2. Verse 13 and 8 through 18, other attempts were made during Jesus' ministry. John 17:4. In the crucifixion, Satan thought that he had succeeded, but he was defeated. 1 Corinthians 2:8, Hebrews 2:14 through 15. Now we look at verse 5 and 6. The woman bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. I don't think there's too much question among you that who this is. Well, of course, this is Christ. And we see David had foreseen this as the Messiah. Psalms 2, 6 through 9. The child was caught up to God and his throne. This verse covers the entire life of Jesus, from his birth to the ascension to God's own right hand. Acts 2:33 through 34. And Ephesians and Hebrews and 1 Peter. The woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God. This was a place of hiding, a refuge. She would be fed 1,260 days. This is the same amount of time we read in Revelation 11 and verse number 2 and 3. Chronologically, this verse fits after verse 14. Well, who are these? Well, initially, the woman represents God's faithful remnant of Israel. The dragon is Satan. The man-child is Christ. The woman in the wilderness is the church. 1,260 days is during the time of the Roman Empire. And you've got to connect through this the destruction of Jerusalem over in AD 70. The woman is God's bride, the faithful remnant, Isaiah 54, 1 through 17, Jeremiah 24, 1 through 10. The woman, the dragon is Satan, Revelation 12, 9. The woman in the wilderness is the church, Ephesians 1, 20. And the 1,260 days correspond to the time of the Roman Jewish wars. When we look at the war in heaven, verse 7 through 12, 7 through 9, the Bible consistently teaches that the spiritual conflicts on earth reflect a cosmic struggle taking place in heavenly places. Here we see that war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon. Well, who's going to win? God's going to win. God's going to always win. That's what people need to understand. While it looks like the world is going to pot, we need to realize that God always wins. If we stay on his side, he's going to be with us. It's when we leave him that the world takes over. Did not prevail, nor the place found for heaven and for them in heaven any longer. God's plan, Satan was defeated, Matthew 16:18, Hebrews 2. The dragon is identified as the serpent of old. This brings to mind his deception in the garden, Genesis 3. He is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. The devil means slanderer, and Satan means adversary. He goes about using deception, John 8:44. We know that. His deception will be explained in Revelation 13. Verse 10, heaven rejoices, salvation and strength, and the kingdom of our God and the power of his child have come. Overcoming death, Jesus has all power. That's what the Lord told him. All power and authority have been given unto me in heaven and in earth. Do we believe it? Well, certainly. We know that he has all power. Why else would you think that when we read about Christians who were put out into the arena, tied to the stake, and they let the lions come out, and historians tell us that they had a smile on their face? Would we have a smile? Would we be crying? Well, they had a smile because God was going to be with them. What about those who said that was under the altar, the souls under the altar crying out, how long, O Lord, how long? And the Lord told him, says, you rest for a while. I'll take care of this. So we don't need to get our retribution. We need to depend on the Lord. He's going to take care of it in the long run. The devil's come down to you having great wrath because he knows that he has a short time. Of which time we don't know. Certainly he doesn't know. Only God knows. He's furious because he has only a short time, Matthew 25, probably in view of his binding. Well, we think about the binding, Revelation 20, verse 1 through 3. What binds him today?
The gospel.
The gospel binds him today. You don't bind a spirit with chains. The gospel binds him today. No wonder the Lord would say to him, get thee behind me, Satan, for it is written. And, of course, what does it mean? It is not known exactly what this took place or when this took place, but its purpose is to illustrate the struggle between good and evil. This is the battle that was promised in Genesis 3:15 that Noam read. Satan has ruled the realm of the dead because sin was present, Hebrews 9:15. But Jesus' blood made atonement for sin, Hebrews 10:5 through 9. The rejoicing picture are the righteous dead in Luke 1:77, Revelation 6:9 through 11. Christ's sacrifice destroyed the works of Satan, and he was cast out in John 1:29. When we look at the dragon on earth over in Revelation 12, verse 13 through 17, verse 13 through 14, being cast out, Satan persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. This is the righteous remnant who followed Christ, Acts 2:41 through 47. The church was now persecuted, Acts 7. What was Paul's main purpose, or Saul, at the time?
Persecute the church.
Persecute the church. When he found them, bring them back. holding the coats of those that were stoning Stephen. Paul recognized that when he pointed out that what I did in ignorance, but did that save him? Well, certainly not. He had to obey the gospel. Verse 15 through 17, the spewed water out of the mouth like a flood after the woman. This is symbolic of tribulation. Psalms 18:4. Isaiah 8, 5 through 8. But the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood. God dried it up, Psalms 144 and verse 7. As we look at the reference. The dragon went to make war with the rest of his offspring. The children of the woman simply that be future generations of righteous. Psalm 149, Acts 2. So what is it? Well, the woman is the church. And the Roman period, the wilderness, is the world. The time and times and half a time is during the Roman Empire. The flood, persecution, the earth, is political uprisings and local wars that diverted the Roman Empire. The offspring are those in the Revelation at the close of the first century. Now, others see the woman as the Jewish foundation of the church. The wilderness as during the Roman Jewish war. The flood is the Roman effort to destroy Judaism and the attack as the church grew. The offspring are those in the Revelation at the close of the first century and beyond. But we conclude by saying that the struggle between good and evil continues to rage. That's why we need to be aware. In 1 Peter 5 and verse 6 through 8. Any comments on chapter 12? Just as clear as mud, right?
Clear as crystal.
All right. Revelation 13. You have to forgive me. I just got over the flu 2 weeks ago, but I've still got a little remnant left. But I'm not contagious, so you don't have to hug me. All right. Revelation 13, 1 through 8. The sea beast and the land beast. Having introduced the dragon to us in Revelation 12, now John introduces the two allies that Satan uses against God's people. These allies are portrayed as monsters, just as the devil himself is pictured as a monster. The imagery of a monster from the sea and the land may come from the Old Testament allusion to the Leviathan, a sea monster. Lady told me one time, said, if you wouldn't use your preacher's voice, then you wouldn't have a cough. So maybe that's it. Maybe I just should talk normally. And a behemoth.
Bottle of water? You want a
Yeah,
bottle of water?
yeah, would please. Like Job 40 through 41. The sea beast, Revelation 13, 1 through 10. Verse 1 and 2, John said, I stood on the sand of the sea. Now, you think about that just for a moment. He said, I stood. John said, I stood. That sort of tells you right then that this is not literal, but figurative. The sea may be symbolic of the tumultuous world of international politics. Revelation 17:15. The beast is seen as having 7 heads, symbolizing authority and complete power. Revelation 17. He has 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his head a blasphemous name, symbolic of power, royalty. What does the beast have? Well, he has like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth, power, his throne, or his mouth like a mouth of a lion, reminiscent of Daniel 7. Go back to Daniel 7 and read that whole chapter concerning the application here. And so we see here that they worship the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worship the beast. To worship the beast is to worship the dragon, which is Satan. 2 Thessalonians 2:9. Verse 5 through 6. The beast spoke blasphemous and was given authority for 42 months. This is the 5th time the number has been used. Revelation 11:2, 3, 12:6, through number 6, and 14, and here in 13:5. The time mentioned in Daniel 7:25, he blasphemed God, his name, and tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. The mouth of any empire is its emperor. What does blaspheme mean?
Speak against God, or to speak against.
That's why when we look over in Matthew 12, it talks about, blaspheming the Holy Spirit. Well, we wouldn't do that. But they did, and it said you won't be forgiven. Now, when we look at it from ourselves, if we don't obey the gospel, we won't be forgiven. And that's what you need to think about.
Walter normally sits right there, Tommy, so just set it down right there. If it spills, it's all right.
Okay. All right. So, verse 7 through 8, it was granted to the beast, to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. Remember, 42 months was all the time that was given. He has authority over every tribe, tongue, nation. The great Roman Empire was not been written in the book of life, whose names were not written in the book of life. The Christians would not worship the beast, the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. This is not the predestination that we hear about of individual, but the foreknowledge of God to send his son, Acts 2, verse 23. We might think about that. Our name, after we obey the gospel, is in the book of life. Now, can it be removed? Certainly it could. That's why when we look over Revelation 2 and 10, that when he points out that be faithful unto death, even if death overtakes you, you be faithful. A lot of times people just don't understand that. To be faithful unto death, even if death overtakes you. Well, who's this beast? Well, some see these symbols, the beast rising out of the sea as the great Roman Empire. The head, which was mortally wounded and healed, refers to the revived persecution in the time of Domitian. Now, when we look at this, of course, I agree with Noam. I took the late date for so many years, and Noam convinced me that it was the early date. And so we see this, but we see all this persecution. Others see the beast rising out of the death of Julius Caesar. Someone looked and says the wounded, one was wounded. He had 7 heads. One was wounded. And they thought maybe this was Nero, because Nero hated Christianity, hated Jews, hated Christianity. But then we see it healed. Well, someone comes along. And there were 4 emperors. 2 of them murdered, 1 committed suicide, and of course, can't remember his name. What, Vespasian? Took over and sort of calmed, but
yeah, he was there was 3 of them that went real quick,
right.
And then Vespasian was the 4th one that stabilized everything. Yeah, I think
He stabilized everything, and of course, this was the 42 months is the worship the beast. It's referring to emperor worship. And the 42 months is from November AD 64 to the death of Nero in June of AD 66. I tried to talk normal out of me doing this today, but
No,
okay. But we're doing all right. On the back page, it says the patience of the saints. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take patience. Patience in everything, verse 9 through 10 of chapter 13. 9, we find an interesting statement at this juncture. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. Take in the understanding. That's when we're trying to talk to someone about the gospel. We pray that they understand. And of course, sometimes we make it just so simple. A person says, well, you're treating me like a child. Well, we're trying to make it so simple that you understand it. And just as the statement is found in the letters to the 7 churches, Revelation 2 and 3. Verse 10, the text says, he who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed by the sword, with the sword. Saints have been taught this principle by the Lord, Matthew 26:52. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. This was the promise of justice, that God would settle the books, and God will. It's his place to get even, to retribute. Verse 10, the text says, we've already read that, of course. The overall census is pretty much the same, but there are some interesting thoughts along this line. Number 1, the knowledge that the beast would be brought down gave the saints reason to persevere. Herkrider says this. Haley offers 2 options. The people of the world who would lead the saints into captivity would be led into captivity. And likewise with the sword. The saints who are destined for captivity or death should not retaliate, Romans 13:2, 1 Peter 2:13. But to fight with spiritual weapons. What weapon do we use? What's our sword? Word of God, the Bible. You've heard people say, well, let me pull out my sword first. And they pull out their Bible and open it up. Others see an additional point. Nero had led many saints captive and had killed many others. He died in much the same way when he committed suicide with the sword. Wasn't this the one who fiddled when Rome was burning? Nero. You know, that shows you something was wrong with him. The land beast in Revelation 13:11 through 18. Verse 11 through 12, John saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. Unless you've watched Pete's Dragon, I don't know how a dragon speaks. But we had a little girl stayed with us, and she wanted to watch that every day, and I know it by heart. All right. The horns represent authority. The lamb is a symbol of quietness and sacrifice, and he who spoke like a dragon, showing his relationship to the dragon. The beast exercised all authority in the first beast and caused the earth and all those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. The best is an instrument of the first beast. Well, a child of God would not worship the beast. You know, we taught a class one time about the conscientious objector. Maybe during this period, a child of God became the conscientious objector because on the armor, and of course, there were those who were drafted into the army of Caesar, and on the armor, the breastplate, there was a picture of Caesar, and they were supposed to honor, worship him, and the Christian wouldn't do it. And so And we couldn't do it today. We couldn't fall down and worship something that was not God. And we see the beast exercise all authority of the first beast and caused the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. 13 through 15. My time up?
No.
Verse, all right. Verse 13 through 15, the beast performs great signs. These are not genuine, but are false. Much like the Pharaoh physicians in Exodus 8 and 9, or the sorcerers or trickery of Simon in verse 8, chapter 8 of Acts in verse 9 and 10. The beast deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs. Satan is all deception. 2 Corinthians 11, 14 and 15. 2 Timothy 3, 13. The beast was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast. This is symbolic of the deception used to prop up the image of the beast. When we look over in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 8 and 10. Verse 16 and 17. The beast causes all to receive a mark on their right hand or on their head. This is why I said that when we're talking to people today, they're talking about things like this. We'd hope that we could just start off with the Bible and teach the basic plan. But we've got to get a lot of this out of people before we could start with the Bible and talk with the simplistic plan. You know, people, they want to talk about this. They want to talk about, what about the Battle of Armageddon? What about the 1,000-year reign? What about the period of tribulation? What about all these things?
The reason is that most of them have heard all kinds of fanciful tales about them, all kinds of like science fiction type stuff, like the Left Behind series that Tim LaHaye wrote, and they think that that's how it's going to be. It's going to be just like those books say. And so you know that they want to talk about these things, and it's hard to get them away from it.
Well, you know, it hadn't been that long. You walk into a religious bookstore, it scare you half to death. All the pictures on the covers of the books. Hal Lindsey's late great Planet Earth. And he talked about the blood being up to the bridle of the horse. Well, you know, if this is something in the future, we don't use horses anymore. It had to be up to the gun of the tank, and that's a lot of blood. But these are things that we need to get out of people, realizing that these are figurative instead of literal, and that being faithful, you know, 1,000 years is one day with the Lord. I realize it's mentioned. We'll talk about the Antichrist. It's mentioned. What's anti mean? Against Christ. And so each and every one of us are Antichrist, aren't we? No, that's right. That's right. Try to catch you. No, we're not Antichrist. We're for Christ. We're not Antichrist. Many in the world are. And I'm not talking about just one man. We're talking about anyone who's against the Lord.
People think that the Bible talks about the Antichrist or you know, one person, like the Omen movies, you know, the son of the devil is going to be born and be the Antichrist. But the Bible talks about, you know, Antichrist, many.
Right.
And it means anybody who's against Christ. Anybody who is against the gospel, is against the church, they're Antichrist. They're against Christ. That's
right. When it talks about the mark, now don't get me wrong, it might be a day come when we might have to have a mark. We've already noticed it, that we can use our thumb now on a lot of things on our tablets, iPads and what have you. Just put your thumb and it opens it up. There might come a day when they want to put a chip in us, and we just walk, we want a Coke, and we walk by and swipe our hand, and the Coke comes out because it's already took $5 out of our checking account, you know. And so there might come a time like that. But verse 18, let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for as the number of a man, his number is 666. What do you think about that? I heard of a lady one time driving through a McDonald's, and she got a Coke and a hamburger, and it came to 666. And she said, oh no, put a piece of pie on there. So she would get that number 666. Scares them half to death. My daughter lived in Indiana, and somebody put 666 on a big rock out in front of their house. People were scared to death of those people in the house, which was ridiculous.
I had a cashier, my change came up to $6.66. She said, I'm gonna give you another penny so I don't give you $6.66.
See, she was thinking.
Yeah.
And
I have met a few kids that I checked behind the rear.
that had what now?
I said I've met a few kids that I've checked behind the rear.
All right. Who is this beast? Some sees the beast coming up out of the earth. That's false religion. Revelation 16:13, 19:20, and 20:10. He causes the earth to worship the false beast. Through state religion comes state worship, and a state idol, emperor of the Roman Empire, is performing great signs or the trickery of the priest. The image of the beast are the statues and temples of the emperor cult. The mark is seen as not being literal. The number 666 is not a literal person, but a fail system.
When you look at the way that numbers are used, and it says it there, it's the number of a man. 7 is the number of perfection,
Right.
Deity, like the 7 spirits of God, talking about the deity of the Holy Spirit. And then the number 3 is completion. So 777 would be completely divine, completely God, deity.
Good point.
So take one away from that, 6 is less than God. By 3, 666, and it's saying that this person who wants to be worshipped as a God, he's completely not God. He's just a man.
Right.
It's the number of a man. Don't worship him. He's just a man. That's what the mark means, is that he's just a man.
You know, and again, we look back at the Antichrist. How many thought that Ronald Wilson Reagan was the Antichrist because it's 6 of Ronald, 6 Wilson, and 6 Reagan,
Yeah.
or Adolf Hitler,
Yeah.
or anyone else.
Or
But 666.
The Latin term on the Pope's mitre adds up to 666.
Right.
The numerical value of it.
Okay, others see much the same thing with some differences. He causes the earth to worship the first beast. He's seen more specifically referring to the commune of Asia, or the Asiatics of Acts 19, and which organized and promoted the practice of emperor worship. The number 666 is used to identify the specific administration and the power at the time, the Roman Empire, Caesar. And there are many questions, no doubt. But what is clear is that Satan has introduced 2 weapons, the Roman Empire and the pagan religion, in order to destroy the people of God. What is also clear is the fact that he will fail and God will prevail. All right. Chapter 14. Questions on chapter 13? Okay. Chapter 14, after introducing the evil allies of the dragon, Revelation 12 and 13, John now gives us a picture of hope, of triumph, and judgment. Some commentators see this chapter as a series of 7 visions comparable to the other series of sevens in the book, the letters, the seals, the trumps, and bowls. The Lamb and the 144,000. Verse 1, in this vision, John sees the Lamb standing on Mount Zion. The Lamb as in Revelation 5, 5, and 6. The prophets often spoke of Zion as where God would set the king, his king, Psalms 2, 6, Zechariah 9, and verse 9. It's from here the law would go forth, Micah 4, verse 1 through 7. With the Lamb were 144,000 having his father's name written on their foreheads. 144,000 were identified earlier in Revelation 7, 3 through 4, and were sealed in their foreheads, not the hands, Revelation 13, 16. Verse 2 and 3, John heard a voice from heaven like the voice of many waters, and a loud thunder, and harpers playing their harps. This may be in connection with the 144,000 crying out with a loud voice, Revelation 7 and 9 through 13. They sang as it were a new song taken from Isaiah 42, verse 9 and 10. It is said no one could learn that song except the 144,000. These are in a unique position. Hebrews 11:13. Verses 4 and 5, the 144,000 are further identified. They were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. That's why when we hear of religious groups that say that, will be in the penthouse, which would be heaven all the way, and of course each floor would be different people, and I think they point to us being in the basement. And but 144,000, and they talk about some of their main leaders. Well, these were all virgins. That's what it says. They were virgins. And this is a picture of purity. These follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They are sealed and reside with the Lord. They were redeemed from among men. They once lived as mortals. They were first fruits to God and to the Lamb. They seem to suggest a set number. But in these they are found no deceit, for they are without fault. No blame has been placed on them. And all these characteristics belong to those previously discussed in Revelation 7, verse 4 through 8. Well, who are these? Two thoughts. Some see the Lamb standing on Mount Zion as the spiritual kingdom, the church. Hebrews 12:22. 144,000 as the complete number of saints on earth. Revelation 7, 3 through 8. The voice from heaven and the new song as the song of redemption. Revelation 5, 8, and 10. The characteristics of the 144,000 as their faithfulness to God and not worshiping the beast. Others see a different picture. The Lamb standing on the Mount Zion is seen as the spiritual kingdom, the church. Hebrews 12, verse 22. But the 144,000 is seen as the righteous children of Israel who died before the death of Christ. Revelation 7, 3 through 8. They are on Mount Zion with Israel who died, with the lion, the Lamb, to begin the new order. Psalms 2, 1 through 12, Isaiah 2, 3. The voice from heaven and the new song as the song of praise for the atonement for sin. And, of course, we see by the death of Christ, Hebrews 11, 13, 39 through 40. Now they are redeemed, Hebrews 9, 15, 12 through 23. The characteristics of the 144,000 is seen as further identifying them as dying before the death of Christ. They are not defiled in that they do not marry. Matthew 22, 28 through 32. And they go with the Lamb, 1 Thessalonians 3, 13. They're perfect. The gospel is preached, Revelation 14, 6 through 7. Verse 6, another angel flying in heaven was seen having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth. This is the gospel of the first Great Commission, Matthew 28, Mark 16. It was preached to every nation, tribe, and tongue, and people. This is the scope of the gospel. Romans 1:16, Colossians 1:23. Verse 7, the angel said, "Fear God and give glory to him." God is to be revered as the creator. Ecclesiastes 12:13 and 14. Romans 1:21. The reason for the hour of the judgment has come. This has always been the gospel warning. Acts 17. What does it mean? Well, some see this applying to the emperor worship and the downfall of the Roman Empire. Others see the coming forth of the gospel from Pentecost, Acts 2, Hebrews 12:22 through 24, and primarily the judgment against Jerusalem, Matthew 24:14. Babylon is fallen, Revelation 14:8. And another angel followed and said, "Babylon is fallen, that great city." This is the first of 6 times Babylon is mentioned. Revelation 14:8, 16:8, 17:5, 18:2, and 10 and 21. And of course, this is an Old Testament statement, Isaiah 21:9. The reason for this fall, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. This is another allusion to the Babylonian of old, Jeremiah 51:7. What does it mean then? Well, some see the fall of the Roman Empire and the political headquarters of John's day. Others see Jerusalem, Deuteronomy 32:1 through 44 and 32, 33. Emperor worship are warned in Revelation 14:9 through 11. In verse 9 through 11, then a third angel followed, warning all who receive the mark and worship the beast will also drink of the wine of God's wrath. This is a common Old Testament phrase regarding God's judgment. Isaiah 51:17, Jeremiah 25:15-16, Psalm 75 and verse 8, Ezekiel 23 verse 31 through 34, which is poured out full strength into the cup of indignation, meaning not diluted with water. He shall be tormented with fire and brimstone. We compare with God's destruction, or Sodom's destruction by God. Genesis 19:28 and Luke 17. Verse 11, the smoke of their torment ascends forever, and they have no rest day or night. This torment is as age-lasting as the torment that Satan, dragon, shall suffer. Revelation 20 and 10. What does it mean? Well, overall, both sides agree on the outcome in these verses. Some see the warning of God's eternal punishment, or those who would ally themselves with the beast. Others see eternal punishment, but also see this as a forecast of the developing conflict between Christ and Satan after the fall of Babylon, Jerusalem, and lead up to the persecution of Domitian 95 through 96 AD, and on to the collapse of the empire, Daniel 2:44. We see the patience of the saints, Revelation 14:12 through 13. Verse 11, here it is, patience of the saints. 2 things to consider. First is the fact that God will punish those who do evil. This is the perseverance of the saints. Second is the fact that the Christian must endure to receive the reward, Mark 10:29 through 30. And who are those who patiently endure is those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. In verse 13, a voice was heard saying, "Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on." We use this a lot of times when we preach our funeral sermon. And blessed are the dead who die in the Lord. All spiritual blessings are in Christ, Ephesians 1 and verse 3. Yes, says the Spirit, they that rest from their labors and their works follow them. For Christian who dies in the Lord, there's great reward. Matthew 25:34, 2 Peter 1:5 through 11. What does it mean? Pretty much an agreement. Be faithful in persecution. Here is great reward. Reward for the faithful. Also a picture of the developing church. First, the gospel is preached. Second, Babylon's Jerusalem is destroyed in 70 A.D. Third, the conflict instigated by Satan between Christianity and the Roman Empire breaks out. The harvest of the earth, Revelation 14:14. Verse 14, John saw a white cloud, and on the cloud sat on one like the Son of Man. Have you ever heard someone say, well, the Lord's just sitting up on a cloud, and he's got this big long stick, and he's pouncing us, you know. Well, obviously reference to Christ, Daniel 7:13. In his hand there was a sharp sickle, a clear symbol of harvest, and used 7 times in this chapter. Verse 15 through 16, another angel came out of the temple, thrust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap. One might recall the words of John the Baptist here, Matthew 3:7 through 12. For the harvest of the earth is ripe. Jesus spoke of a harvest, Matthew 9:37 through 38, John 4:35 through 38. So he who sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. It was Jesus who sat on the white cloud, and it was he who thrust in his sickle. All right, what does it mean? This first harvest means to refer to the gathering of righteous ones, Matthew 3:12. And is distinguished from the one to follow. This is symbolic of the gospel sown on Pentecost, and thereafter the reaping was not realized until the death of the saints. All right. The last point would be the reaping the vine of the earth, Revelation 14:17 through 18. Then another angel came out of the temple. This angel is not identified. Then another angel came out from the altar. It is interesting that this angel came from the altar, from where the martyred saints were lying, Revelation 6, verse number 9 through 11. And from where the fire was taken and cast into the earth, Revelation 8. This angel said, thrust in your sickle, sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vines of the earth. For an Old Testament parallel, see Joel 3:13. Because her grapes are fully ripe. This means their wickedness was full, and so God's judgments against them are just. Genesis 15:16. Verse 19 through 20. This angel gathered the vine of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. Again, there are Old Testament parallels, Isaiah 63:1 through 6, Jeremiah 25:29 through 33. The winepress was trampled outside the city. This is interesting because normally grapes are put inside the winepress, but here they are trampled outside. Notice the blood came out of the winepress up to the horse's bridle for 1,600 furlongs. This is an area about 200 miles long. Well, what does it mean? Some see this not as eternal judgment, but as God's judgment against Roman Empire. Others see the vine of the earth as the nation of Israel, God's choice vine. Psalms 80, Isaiah 5, Jeremiah 2, Ezekiel 17. Two things are seen in this statement. The winepress was trampled outside the city. First, it seems has been suggestive of the crucifixion in which Jesus suffered outside the gates, Hebrews 13. Second, the Roman army trampled Jerusalem from outside of the city. The Romans besieged the city in the spring of 70 AD, moving their weapons of war against the city, throwing fireballs, darts, arrows, stones, until it was destroyed, until every drop of blood was extracted from it. All right, as we have seen in this chapter, John does give a picture of hope, triumph, and judgment. God will keep his promises, and we must endure to enjoy their reward. Truly, this is the patience of the saints. Any comments?